Got PSI, any amendments or corrections?
Yes. Your Honor, the PSI notes that the range on the murder is incorrect. That is on page 1. And I'm sorry, I mean the attempt murder. It notes that it's 8 to 24. It should be 16 to 48 years. That was the only correction that I noted.
And it's 16 to 48 in light of the use of a weapon. Any corrections on behalf of the defense?
Just that the pre-sentence confinement date is reflective of the earlier sentencing date. By my count, the correct number for today would be 1,217.
Thank you. We'll proceed as follows. I will hear from defense counsel as well as anyone who wants to speak on behalf of the defendant. Then from the people, anyone wants to speak on behalf of or as a victim. And then Mr. Arroyo will have the opportunity to address the court before I impose sentence. He's not required to, but he has that right. So I'll start with defense counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. I guess first, I want to point out that despite having one of the strongest families in terms of support, commitment, and desire to do everything they can to assist Mr. Arroyo through this process that I've ever seen. I'm not asking the court to hear from any of Mr. Arroyo's family or from Mr. Arroyo himself. I think that the reasons for that from a legal point of view are obvious in a situation like this, but I really do think I'd be remiss if I didn't, again, just note for the record, Mr. Arroyo's father, Danny, his mother, Sharon, and his sister, Shireen, have been at every single court date. And I have been on this case. I wasn't the first attorney on this case. I wasn't the second attorney on this case. But I've been on this case for over 2 years now. So my own personal experience is pretty lengthy. And I don't think I've ever had a case of any type where someone's family has been so actively involved and committed to coming to each date, sitting through hours of often unrelated matters just to do anything they can to support their son, their brother, and like each other court date, they're here again today. And I think that level of support is reflective of how good of a person Jason Arroyo is and how much they know about him that the court and any of the other people who have observed any portions of this case or the trial, how much better they know Jason Arroyo than any of us possibly could. I have been on this case for quite some time, and I feel like I have gotten to know Mr. Arroyo pretty well. And the Jason Arroyo portrayed in the trial, obviously, look, there are necessarily limitations of what can be presented in a trial, what's relevant to the determinations that have to be made at a trial, evidentiary rules that control admission of evidence. But it's especially stark in this case, the difference between the Jason Arroyo that came out in the testimony and the opinions of him that came across from the witnesses, and the Jason Arroyo that I know and that his family knows and that anyone who really spends time with him knows almost immediately. He is the type of person who is absolutely committed to doing what he can to protect the people he cares about and who care about him. And it has been clear to me in a way that I can't possibly effectively convey that he didn't want what happened here to occur. He has never celebrated it or felt good about the outcome and the tragedy that occurred. And his heart goes out to the family, the Lucero family, and everyone that was present, traumatized, or otherwise affected negatively by what happened. And if he could take it back, if he could do things differently, I have no doubt that we wouldn't be here. But he's the type of person who did what he felt he had to do under the circumstances in light of all of the different things that have affected him so profoundly and led him to the position he was in that day. The courts read the PSI, the courts read and heard testimony from both of the doctors who evaluated Mr. Arroyo. So the court has a lot of background in a number of the things that I'm referring to. But at the end of the day, Jason Arroyo is a thoroughly good person who's committed to his family, committed to doing what he can to care for, provide for, and protect those people. And I think that the tragedy and the outcome that nobody wanted that occurred here was an extension of that part of his personality that was itself a product of a lot of the trauma that he's been through in his life, a lot of the disadvantages that he's had in his life. The court, again, I'm not going to belabor the point, but he had one of the most difficult upbringings and hands dealt in life that I have seen in a long time, in terms of being disadvantaged and constantly having to fight just to have the same opportunities and the same chance in life that all of us, I think, take for granted. The court is in a position where on the highest count there is only one option for sentencing. I'm asking the court to consider its discretion in the other counts. But I know that no matter what happens here, and no matter what happens moving forward, Mr. Arroyo is going to move from this in as positive a way as possible, in the same way that he has since he was arrested over 3 years ago. And I know he's going to take advantage of every opportunity he has moving forward. I know that he's going to do everything he can to set a positive example for the people around him and to continue to be that upstanding, honest, faithful, committed member of the family that he's always been. And I'm looking forward to seeing that. I know his family is looking forward to seeing that. I'd ask the court to take into consideration on some of those other counts all of the different things that the court has heard, that the court is aware of, that weren't presented at trial but came out through other hearings or other testimony or other documents submitted to the court. And I'm looking forward, like I said, to seeing Mr. Arroyo move past this. And I know that he's excited to take that next step. And I appreciate the court for giving me and Ms. Buck and everyone who's going to speak today the time to do that. Because despite the mandatory sentence, Mr. Arroyo is an individual who absolutely deserves to have some of these things heard because, as I said in the beginning, the difference between the characterization of him in the trial and the Jason Arroyo that I know, that Ms. Buck knows, and that his family knows is profound.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Mr. Levelis covered a lot of it, and I just want to briefly add in support that to reiterate the acknowledgement of the tremendous loss that the Lucero family has endured, losing a critical piece of their family, and that is not lost on anyone from our table, from the family in support. And today, by operation of the law, we will engage in a second taking. And it will be Jason's life that is now taken from freedom and confined for the rest of it at this stage by operation of that law. And I state that only because it is a shame to me, because as this court heard during the trial, through some of those struggles that Mr. Levelis described, the things that came out, the loss of literacy, the limited cognitive functioning, but also the things that the court is aware of through those evaluations that were not by trial strategy introduced because of the operation of the plea that we entered. The level of risk assessment that came through and the way in which Mr. Arroyo perceives situations. And that was something that ultimately was redacted from the report. It was an NGRI basis. We did not proceed in that fashion, but it is still relevant today to understand that in this moment, the moment at issue here, Mr. Arroyo was faced with a split-second decision. He did so from his standpoint, with his functioning, and with his level of threat perception. And I think he misassessed the threat. And one of the things that came up in the trial were these jail calls. There were many, 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 many of them. And what came out in some of them as well is an acknowledgement. I think if he could do it again, he'd probably do it different. It never went the way he wanted. And it's a shame to me only that today, by operation of the law, Mr. Arroyo will be treated the same as someone who deliberately and cold-bloodedly intended to cause the harm that was caused in this case. And I know that that's not what happened, and I know that that's not who he is. And so we recognize that the arguments with respect to the other counts are largely academic in light of the top count here. But wanted to state again, to reiterate, it is only at our advice that the family is not speaking. I know they have so much that they want to say about how much they love him, how much they know him, and how hard this is on everybody. And my hope moving forward from today is that everyone can begin to heal and move forward, both the Lucero family and Mr. Arroyo and his family, as we move into the next steps of this case, with my support and appreciation for the person who I got to know during this case.
Thank you. I'll hear from the people.
Your Honor, I would like to briefly address the court. Then I have a letter to read. Mr. Casillas will speak, and then Mr. Freeberg will have some brief remarks, if that is acceptable. Your Honor, defense counsel says the defendant is a good person. The defendant threw a bucket of water on kids who were pretending that his fence was a movie screen. They were being quieter than usual and good that day. Jason Arroyo shot 3 people in front of his niece who was telling him, no, 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 stop. He shot someone in front of their kids, 2 people, actually. He caused injury to another. He shot a man who was 20 feet away from him over 5 times. He killed a mother and grandmother who was also his neighbor and had been nothing but kind to him and his family. And then he hid the murder weapon in a toilet and fled from police, leaving his 2 young nieces alone in the family home with 3 individuals outside bleeding from gunshot wounds that he caused. That's what Jason Arroyo did. That's who he is. And that's why he was convicted at trial for killing Patricia Cruz after deliberation and with intent, for trying to kill Chris Lucero, shooting him multiple times and causing serious bodily injury, for putting Patricia Fleming in the line of fire, and for putting Priscilla Young in the line of fire and causing her injury as well. I have a letter to read from Sally Garcia Bruce, and Richard Casillas would like to address the court. I will check with him as to what order, if I may.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Richard Casillas.
Good morning, sir.
I'm here this morning to let you know how this crime affected us and my stepdaughter. Okay, on September 6th, my wife Patricia Cruz, my stepson Christopher Lucero, stepdaughter Priscilla Young were all victims of a horrific shooting. It would lead to my wife's death 11 days later, leaving my stepson and stepdaughter severely injured and nearly shooting 7 children who were playing in the back of the house. 5 of those were my grandkids. 2 are my neighbor's kids. The effect of this crime has not only impacted me emotionally, financially, and mentally, but she has paid the ultimate price. She has no father, she has no mother, and I took over as being her guardian. Her mother was her caregiver for the past 35 years of her life, and that's been taken away. This has been a major traumatic life change for her, seeing that she suffers from autism and other mental disabilities. This is disabilities. This has sent our lives into utter chaos. She can't speak or communicate due to her disabilities, so I will be her voice. After the shooting, we spent 8 months of her not sleeping. Me sleeping on the floor with her running to her screams, her panicking, because I'm her step-parent, not her biological father. She was worried about losing me every time we went to court. I spent 6 months after that trying to get guardianship, in which I was granted. I promised her mother that I would take care of her if anything would happen to her, because I understand her the best. I haven't been able to work. I just recently got approved as caregiver for her. That's my only income. We were without income for almost 2 years. No money coming in because everything was frozen. I just replenished all my finances. Now I have to depend on the government for help. This crime has taken away my basic manhood, but has given me insight of what my wife meant to us and how much she was loved by everyone who knew her. To this day, Priscilla suffers from PTSD. She's paranoid, and the anxiety she suffers from causes her to pull her hair out because she worries about losing me too, and likewise, I'm worried about losing her. I can't mourn or cry because I don't want to worry Priscilla sometimes. Sometimes she catches me and tries her best to comfort me. Every day I look into her eyes and see the sadness, the hurt, the disgust because of this crime. And every day I reassure her that it will be okay. Everything will be fine. She doesn't need the stress of this on her. That's why I'm here, to take it for her. I'm her voice, I'm her fighter. But right now, we want to know why. This crime not only ruined my dreams for my family, it spiraled me into a nightmare. All my hopes were set on fire and burned right in front of me. I would like Your Honor to take into consideration when he sentenced this person to all the lives that he disrupted, to all the lives he ruined, all the hopes and dreams, not only our lives, but his family's lives. Get over it, Priscilla, come on. I would ask for the maximum sentence that he can get, because that's what he sentenced us to when he took a wife, a mother, a grandmother, mother-in-law, a daughter-in-law, a daughter, a sister, a cousin, an aunt, a stepmother, a friend to many, and her savior, because she's been Siamese twin to her mother for that 35 years, and it crushed her life. She was not able to see her mother. The last impression she had of her mother was laying on that sidewalk. That's the last time she saw him. She never went. If you would have been there to hear the outburst when she realized her mom was never coming back, was at her funeral. She let the wailing out, and it killed me. And she shouldn't have to go through that. So, Your Honor, I asked you for the maximum. Not for me, but for her, because he sentenced her to a life of hell. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I have a letter to read. My name is Sally Garcia Bruce. I am Patricia Cruz's first cousin and Priscilla Young's godmother. Me and Patricia were always close growing up. I always referred to her as Patty. She always wanted me to be part of her life, so when she gave birth to her firstborn Priscilla, she asked me to be her godmother. I was so overjoyed and felt so privileged to be part of her life. When Priscilla was 6 months old, she noticed something was wrong, and she later learned that Priscilla was severely autistic and would never reach mentally past the age of 4 years old. That never stopped Patty in providing her and giving her the best life possible. She loved her so much, and Priscilla was her world. Patty was a wonderful wife, mother, and grandmother. She loved her family fiercely. She lived every day for her family and was very devoted in all aspects of their lives. Her favorite pastime was to spend time with her family at home and enjoy backyard barbecues. I was to attend the barbecue that fateful day, but due to a root canal I had done, I was unable to attend. I had spoken to Patty, and we made plans to meet the following weekend. Unfortunately, it was never to transpire. This senseless act has happened this day is forever embedded in our hearts and minds. The horror that was inflicted to everyone involved has devastated our family in so many ways. It's hard to fathom the destruction one person can cause over something so trivial as children playfully enjoying the outdoors. I am torn and so unbelievably hurt that words elude me. To think about her grandchildren, son, and my goddaughter being targeted like animals is so unthinkable that as a God-fearing person, that is just plain evil. My goddaughter is so tormented and still has nightmares. She is the one that lost the most in all of this senselessness. I could not imagine what she has to endure. She was always by her mother's side, as she depended on her mother for daily care and needs. Priscilla was doing as she always has done, standing next to her mother, when she was wounded and unbeknown to everyone because of her inability to communicate, went undetected until she was being given a bath later that day. What all of them had to witness is just so unthinkable, that their grandmother and father being shot several times and Patty eventually succumbing to her injuries after a week has left holes in our lives. The continued counseling for kids and Christopher is ongoing. The mental anguish and financial burden that Richard has now is overwhelming, and the realization of having to raise a severely autistic woman on his own has been the most challenging and difficult thing he has ever faced. Losing his spouse and partner in life is more than anyone can imagine. Christopher is having survivor's remorse and still struggles with the mental and physical impairments that were caused by gunshots. His mother was his world, and to witness her being executed and laying helplessly unable to help her has crushed him to the core. The children truly saw evil that day and has forever destroyed the carefree playfulness and security that they once had. They will forever question life and worry daily what horror may lay in wait for them. We are a God-fearing family. Patty was so spiritual and faithful that I know she would have forgiven Mr. Arroyo. In knowing my cousin, I will also forgive you, Jason. I pray that your time in jail will open your heart to fully understand the depths of your actions and the lifelong devastation you have caused so many innocent, beautiful people. I ask on behalf of my family to please sentence Mr. Arroyo to the full extent for his crimes, so our family may somehow start the healing process. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you.
Your Honor, briefly, we have filed a motion for a total restitution amount of $3,944.28. If I may turn this over to Mr. Cooper.
And is that the full extent? There's no additional restitution being sought beyond that?
Correct.
Your Honor, the court is in a uniquely legal situation in the sense that there is effectively only a symbolic sentence available to the court's discretion. I say that because the practical outcome of the court's sentence today will be the same regardless of what the court decides to do, because life without the possibility of parole is mandatory here. And so I think it's worth pondering for a moment the purpose of sentencing someone beyond their entire life. This is a question that comes before the court today, in large part because there are more than just one victim. Patricia Cruz lost her entire life, and for that, losing his entire life's freedom. He is to be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The question then for the court to decide is that sentence sufficient such that the court can run the remaining sentences at a minimum or effectively concurrently? Now, because there are crimes of violence here, the court does have to run certain sentences, specifically the sentences relating to Mr. Chris Lucero's victimization here consecutively. The question then becomes where within that range should the court place the defendant's sentence?
Let me ask a technical legal question about that.
Sure.
Does the attempted murder, the F2, merge with the first degree assault?
I believe it does. Yes.
So it's so the focus then is on the 16 to 48 range that Ms. Staub
That's
asked
right.
about at the outset.
That's right, Your Honor.
Thank you.
16 to 48 for the attempted murder conviction on Chris Lucero. The 10 to 32 would be encompassed concurrently. The court then has the discretion to decide if the other convictions for Priscilla and Patricia Fleming should run concurrently or consecutively. Your Honor, my ask of the court is to sentence Mr. Arroyo to life without plus 52 years. And my calculation stems from effectively looking at the sentence of 16 to 48 for Mr. Chris Lucero as a sentence requiring fairness and in a just outcome to be the full 48, plus 2 years as a sentence for the third degree assault on Miss Priscilla Young, and an additional 2 years, one for each count of reckless endangerment, one for Miss Priscilla Young, the other for Patricia Fleming. You know, this sentence, as I said at the outset, is somewhat symbolic, but it's still just as important to the gears of justice that they be recognized in this sentence, because it is more than just Patricia Cruz who was affected by this case, obviously. Miss Cruz, her life is over, but the consequences for her family members is immense here, and I think if the court were to view this in a vacuum, simply looking at it from the standpoint of just a first-degree attempted murder on Christopher Lucero, I think the court can then fashion what should be an appropriate sentence there. And I think the court can make a reasonable inference from the verdict here. What the jury found, given the option to decide on murder in the first degree, either between extreme indifference or after deliberation and with intent, or both, the jury selected only after deliberation and with intent. And I think the reasonable inference here, and this was in part how I argued this at closing, was that it stands to reason that the real target of Mr. Arroyo's attempted murder and effective murder was Christopher Lucero. I do not think it's at all an unfair reach to say that his intent that day, which the jury found, was to kill Mr. Lucero. And in doing so, he killed Mr. Lucero's mother. And so when the court then looks to fashion a sentence for Mr. Lucero, I think the court should consider the fact that this really very easily could have been a double murder, and that Mr. Lucero's death would have also resulted in a life without the possibility of parole sentence for Mr. Arroyo. And it is only by a miraculous set of circumstances that the 6 bullets that he had to endure did not kill him. It's remarkable, in fact, that he was able to survive that. Now, I thought at one point while I was getting ready for this sentencing about asking the court to assign a number of years to each bullet. But ultimately, Your Honor, again, given that this is effectively a symbolic portion of the sentence, I'm simply asking the court to max out the 48 years. Effectively, Your Honor, this would have been a life sentence, but for Mr. Lucero's tenacity to survive and continue to provide for his family, for his wife, and for his children. But I think that it is separate and apart, then, from the sentence that the court must hand down for both Priscilla Young and Patricia Cruz. Priscilla Young, of course, present today but unable to speak for herself, was shot in the stomach. And the sentence at the time that this was charged maxes out at 2 years on that misdemeanor. I think that it is only appropriate to run that sentence maxed out at 2 years consecutively. Because to run it concurrent, which the court has the discretion to do, effectively swallows up Miss Priscilla Young as a victim entirely, such that she's not properly represented in this sentence. I think it would be a remiss judgment of the court not to give her rightful placement in this sentence to be recognized as a victim in this case. And the same goes for Miss Fleming. Miss Fleming, fortunately, was physically unharmed, but was present and downwind or downrange from the defendant's shots, and the jury found that she was placed in a reckless endangerment circumstance. That's an M2. It maxes out at 1 year. And again, I believe it's appropriate to run that sentence consecutively to the 48 years for Mr. Lucero and the 3 years for Miss Priscilla Young, 3 being 2 for third-degree assault, 1 for reckless endangerment. And so that's how I arrived at 52 years, because I believe that 52 years under the circumstances and given the jury's verdict properly represents the harm caused and inflicted upon the 3 remaining victims that survived. The remaining victims that were identified in the verdict. Of course, we've now heard of all the other victims, including the defendant's own family, by virtue of the fact that they're losing their son today. You know, I do have to make a few comments in response to my colleague Mr. Lovelace's statements about the defendant's heart going out to the family of the victim, and that if he could, he would take back his actions. We have reviewed the jail calls to exhaustion in this case, including the jail calls that came down immediately following the verdict in this case. And throughout those jail calls, there are not comments from the defendant demonstrating remorse for the family. What there is, in fairness, is there are times when he feels bad about the things he was seeing in trial, specifically autopsy photos, things of that nature. But his statements to his family following the verdict was that he was glad it was over and that he was laughing about it. He maintains that this was a setup, that he's the wrong person, that it was self-defense, that everybody's lying. There isn't anything I can glean from what he has said to his own family in those jail calls that suggests he would do anything differently in this case if he could. And that he still feels that what he did was perfectly justified. And it wasn't. And the jury resoundingly said that it was not. The other thing I want to respond to is what what my colleague Danica said about the defendant being treated the way a person who deliberately and cold-bloodedly killed another, how they would be treated. I don't think that that's how he is being compared. I think that's what happened in this case. The jury found that he intended to kill a person, that he made efforts to kill a person, and in doing so, he killed a person. The transferred intent component does not afford him any leniency from the court's sentencing. And he was found guilty of first-degree murder after deliberation and with intent. And so it's not like that kind of case. It is that kind of case. The jury found that this is not an extreme indifference murder. This is a after deliberation with intent murder. You know, the last thing I want to say about this case is just that obviously nobody wins here. This type of circumstance is a loss across the board. But what we ask the court to do is to hold the defendant accountable to the full debt of the harm that he caused. And the debt that he has exceeds his entire life. Because he took an entire life, and he ruined several more. Life plus 52 years is that debt. And so I'm asking the court to sentence accordingly, because it's what Mr. Arroyo deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me start by extending my condolences to the family of Ms. Cruz, to Mr. Lucero, Ms. Young, the entirety of that family for their loss. It certainly is apparent that Ms. Cruz was a centerpiece of that family, and her loss is devastating to all of them. And I want to not only extend my condolences, but my admiration to Mr. Casillas for what he has done to step in on behalf of Ms. Young and to assume the role of a caregiver. And I hope that Mr. Lucero and the rest of the extended Cruz family will continue to support Mr. Casillas as he supports Ms. Young. The issue before me on the first-degree murder charge, as has been indicated, there is no discretion. That sentence is life without parole. I acknowledge what defense counsel has said about the support for Mr. Arroyo from his family. They did not choose to speak to me for this sentencing, but they have spoken to me by their presence, and it's clear that they do love and support their son. And I don't attribute that just to an unconditional love from parents to child, but rather a recognition that they see good things in their son. And even someone who has done something as horrible as Mr. Arroyo has done is not without good qualities. It's not for me to make a judgment about whether he is a good person or not, however. My role here is to address the very horrific thing that he did and the harm that he inflicted. It's an overstatement, however, to say that I focus solely on the impact on the victims. Because if that were the case, there would be no question about the outcome. It should be the absolute maximum because of the harm to the victims. But that's one part of the equation. A very, very significant part, absolutely. And our law reflects that when you take a life, it is life without parole when it's first-degree murder. Our law reflects the impact on the victim. But beyond that, I do have to take into account also the actions of the defendant. And while his actions are inexcusable on that specific day, his actions are, I think, a reflection of the difficulties he has faced and his mental state. Not a mental state that rises to the level of a defense, but a mental state that reflects, I think, paranoia. Again, not at a level of a defense, but how he perceives the world and how he reacted here. So, as I said, it's not for me to judge whether he is a good person or not. That is for a higher authority ultimately to decide than me. I look at what is before me in the way of his actions and the harm he caused and why he did this to the extent I can glean that from what I heard both at the trial itself and before that. So I do believe it is important. I won't say it's symbolic. It's more than that. It's important to recognize that while the controlling sentence is the life without parole, obviously, that there were more than one victim here, and that needs to be acknowledged in the sentence. So my sentence, the attempted first-degree murder after deliberation, the level 2 felony merges into, or is merged with the first-degree assault. serious bodily injury with a deadly weapon, the class 3 felony. I'm sentencing Mr. Arroyo to 45 years consecutive on the attempted first-degree murder. That's not to diminish in any way the harm inflicted on Mr. Lucero by Mr. Arroyo, but it does acknowledge what I've said about Mr. Arroyo. Further, I'm sentencing him to 24 months consecutive on the third-degree assault against Ms. Young, to acknowledge what harm he inflicted on a completely innocent bystander and someone who is suffering far beyond the physical harm that was inflicted on her. On the 2 reckless endangerment charges, 1 year on each of those, but I'm running those concurrent, particularly since the reckless endangerment with respect to Ms. Young is wrapped up in the assault as well on her. And I see the, not to diminish the impact on Ms. Fleming, but as part of what took place here, I do not find it appropriate to run that sentence consecutive as well. So that is an additional 69 years. The jail sentences will be served in DOC. The sentence on the attempted first-degree murder charge also has 5 years of mandatory parole. I believe that's correct as a crime of violence. The jail sentences, of course, do not have parole. The court will also note the 1,217 days of pre-sentence confinement credit and order restitution in the amount of $3,944 and 28 cents. Does the defendant waive further advisement under Rule 32 with respect to his appeal rights?
Yes, we would ask that before filing images in the public defender's office.
So appointed.
Your Honor, I think the court may have said 69 and meant 49.
I'm sorry. I added 24 months to 45 years. So it's 47 years in addition. Thank you for catching that. That was, I shouldn't do math, especially in such a serious occasion as this. So 45 years plus the 2 years makes it 47 years in addition. That is the consecutive aspect of this. Thank you, counsel, for noting that, that I misspoke in that regard. Anything else then on behalf of the people? Anything on behalf of defendant?
Last thing, I would just ask that the minutes, like the office on appeal, that allows us to get the including.
The minutes will reflect the appointment of the public defender for purposes of the appeal, and we'll note the waiver of advisement about Rule 32. And again, my condolences, my best to both of the surviving families here going forward. It is a tragedy that all this has taken place. Court will stand in recess on this matter.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Judge, I know Ms. Coffey's in the virtual courtroom for her case. If you want to call that, I also know there's another in custody coming in.
Yes, we'll get that queued up here in just a second. So we'll need the FTR, switch over to the FTR.
Move, ugly lady.